Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you today.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing well, thank you. And we have to talk about one of our lesser favorite cities. Even though we live near it, we have to talk about Houston and the county commissioner or the county judge from Harris County. They're our close neighbors, but they're not doing very many things that we could say lean toward libertarianism. I think they're authoritarians, and that has changed over the years. It's gotten much worse from the time I moved here many years ago. But anyway, the convention, a Republican convention, was scheduled in a week or two, real close now. And all of a sudden, can't come. Yeah. We're canceling you. So who was behind this? Well, the mayor, Turner, was behind it, as well as the county judge and the Democratic Party. But you know why, though, that is? That's because they're concerned about public health. Yeah. We have to protect public health. So they want to save us from ourselves and make sure the Republicans don't get sick, and they're going to cancel this. But, it's interesting that the mayor has recently attended one of these type of functions, a Black Lives Moment, Black Lives Matter, and he was there, gave a talk, but there was nothing said about that. But it seems to be different for Republicans. I can't believe that is the case. But it's really, to me, an attack on freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and freedom to take your own risks. But when I kept thinking about this, that they're motivated by political hate. They have hate in their heart very often, and it seems like both sides are developing these traits. But anyway, they said they wouldn't do it, and I keep thinking, all this investigation in crimes and penalties for hate crimes and motivated by hate, and I kept thinking, well, maybe this is a hate crime, because they're doing it out of spite. And of course, we could solve that problem without having this invention of hate crimes. We could just do it with civil liberties and the Constitution and the right to meet and with other people and take your own risk. But anyway, it's canceled. So I think 6,000 people were scheduled to come, and it's too dangerous. They're not allowed to do it. I think there will be a little bit of legal stuff going on, but I don't think the Republicans are going to be able to salvage this conference, this state convention. So things are up in the air, but I'll tell you what, it's the motivation is hardly have anything to do with the Republican health. The Republicans' health. No, it's all political stuff, and how do we hurt people? And it's really the hate, I think, is real, and that is the hate toward Trump. Because this is a big deal for the Republican Party. It's a big deal for Trump, too, not to have a big rally here. And the thing is that they hate Trump. They don't like his attitude. But in reality, when you look at, and we look behind the scenes on policies aren't really changing. Are we really bringing our troops home? Are we really curtailing spending? Are we really curtailing the Federal Reserve? None of that happens. But they sure don't like Trump, and I think it reaches the point that many of them are very, very hateful. All you have to do is listen to them on TV, and it looks like they're spewing out hate.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to start, Dr. Paul, by just thanking our super chatters who are out there, and they're always very active. And James Corball is there every day, and he's been a real good super chatter. So I want to thank James and everyone who participates, and we're really happy to have you. But yeah, this does smell very strongly of politics. And let's put up a couple of clips, because sometimes a picture tells 1,000 words, Dr. Paul. Let's put up the first one. Here's the mayor, Sylvester Turner, cancels the Texas GOP convention, calling it a public health risk. He canceled it yesterday, and it was, as you point out, it was scheduled just a couple of days from now. So people have bought their plane tickets, their hotel tickets, or whatever. They've made their travel plans. But don't worry, the mayor said he's speaking not only as a mayor, but as the son of a hotel maid, that he's concerned that the workers might get exposed to coronavirus if they allow the Republicans to hold a convention. But you're right. He was singing a different tune not long ago, and let's go through a couple of clips because, again, pictures are powerful. Remember this, Dr. Paul? Just over a month ago, tens of thousands march on downtown Houston to memorialize George Floyd. They say about 60,000 people. They are not socially distancing right there. Let's go to the next one. Mayor Turner lauds Houston's peaceful George Floyd protests. He was happy. He liked the protests. They were great. No danger at all. Let's do the last one. Not only did he like the protests, he was there participating. He was addressing the protesters, the tens of thousands of protesters. Yet now, when 6,000 people, a small fraction of that, want to get together because they happen to be Republicans, he says, quote, "These are some very serious times. The public health concerns outweigh everything else."
Right. And, you know, the everything else is civil liberties, the Constitution, common sense. That doesn't count, so they have to say it's public health. And, of course, it comes across as hypocritical. You know, I think it's too mild of a term. I think it's a little more serious than just being hypocrites. I think they're lying hypocrites.
Yeah.
You know, they lie through their teeth. And you know, they don't have a monopoly on that problem that we have in this country, hypocrisy and lying and fibbing and misdirecting the people. At this particular moment in history, the hatred and the hypocrisy is directed, you know, toward Trump because he's made himself more vulnerable. But it is a big motivator, and it's no wonder that people get rather disgusted. And I think that especially when they come to realizing when the dust settles, not in the midst of a campaign like we are now, but as the dust settles, nothing ever changes.
Yeah.
Everything stays the same no matter who we have in there. The same process occurs. So this is something that won't change easily. It's going to end badly. This is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. But in the meantime, I think the main goal that I have personally is trying to figure out exactly what's going on and be as truthful as possible and let the people know what's going on. Because right now there's still a lot of people very, very trustworthy, no matter what the government says, you know, and the statistics that the Democrats are now using to close down the convention. The Republicans ought to perk up instead of rolling over and say, well, we have to do this, we have to do this. You know, we have a Congressman Crenshaw, he's all for doing these things too, and he's a Republican, you know. So I don't think that the people are alert enough, and they should be, to realize that that the big issues are Republican and Democrats. It's big government. It's the abuse of authority. It's the abuse of our civil liberties, right and left. And most of the other thing right now, I personally see what's going on is a major distraction from the economic calamity that we're in the midst of and we're in denial of, at least the majority of the American people. Because right now, they're getting more concerned because it was tided over a bit because the immediate reaction by the administrations and Democrats, send money, send everybody a check. And that, you know, temporarily that's helped. That's like an injection of morphine into the economy. So they feel better, but how long is that going to last? And it may run out a month before the election, and that'll have an effect too.
Yeah, it will. And again, politics, it's hard, it's impossible not to at least suspect that politics plays a big part in this. Not just this decision, but overall, because all you see in the media these days are spikes in Texas and Florida. COVID spikes, more cases, Texas and Florida. Well, interestingly enough, first of all, we know Texas is critical for Biden. He wants to try to win Texas. And we also know that the RNC convention is scheduled for Florida. And you can't believe that there's not something involved. And the cancellation of the Houston, Texas GOP convention will set a precedent. They will use it as a precedent in Florida to try to cancel. That's my prediction, to try to cancel Trump's big RNC event, his big kickoff. And I think that will happen. But, you know, the head of the Democratic Party for Texas, Gilberto Hinojosa, he's not only thinking that the Texas Republicans should not complain, they should be thankful. Here's what he said. Republicans are lucky that Democratic and city leaders are willing to do the right thing and shut down their convention. So
is that a bit of hypocrisy?
There is. Sometimes, again, a picture can tell 1,000 words. If we put up that next one really quick, and this is a meme, which is very popular, but this is a very good one. They close your business, they close your church, they close your parks, they close your beaches, they ban funerals, graduations, They made you wear masks. They banned dads in delivery rooms. But they allow this, and it's a huge picture of a huge protest crowd for the George Floyd funeral. You were played. And I think that's a pretty powerful sentence.
Wow.
But, Dr. Paul, I'm not going to leave this little segment on a bad note, because I do want to bring up our friends in Montgomery County.
That's a good idea.
Good people up there. They immediately said, hey, we'll host you up here. Come up to Montgomery County. You're welcome up here. Recently, the GOP in Montgomery County voted to censure Governor Abbott for forcing face masks, and they also said they're not going to enforce the face mask rule. So,
one thing I can assure people, this was a sincere effort to accommodate the Republicans and invited them up. The county judge was involved in this, and the county is a good county. It just happens that we have a lot of supporters there, too. But I wonder why. But no, I think this is good news, and the pressure should be put on. The Republicans should grab this, I know, but my big question would be, can they pull it off this quick? See, the Democrats waited to the last minute figuring they wouldn't do it, but I would say they should give it serious consideration, because I think the attendees would adapt as quickly as possible, and the officials in Montgomery County said they have the facilities and they will make it available, and it can be a success. Boy, if anybody can urge them to do that, yeah. I don't think if I call up the Republican parties of Texas, whether they're going to be too interested in that. But maybe the grassroots Republicans say, look, we want to have a convention, and the people of Montgomery ought to be really out front. But I'm afraid, once they hear, oh, they might like this, it will never get on the news.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be. There's ways of communicating with people, getting the people there, and they'll have to cover it. It'll be on the internet. So I sure encourage them, because I think Montgomery County has stood out as being, and it isn't just typical conservative Republicans there. They're constitutionalists is what they are. They really believe in the Constitution, limited government, and in the principles that founded this country. So this is why this would be a great coup. But I think maybe I'm having too much wishful thinking, but at least I think it's a great idea, and I thank them for the invitation.
You better be careful. They're going to call you up and ask you to come up there and join them if they do it up there. That'd be, well, I think we're going to move on to the next segment, which is unfortunately a lot less joyful than how we ended the last segment. And this is, let's put on the next clip. This is from the BBC, and this is very, very sad news, and I think this is from the UK. But most definitely, it's relevant here. Coronavirus could cause 35,000 extra UK cancer deaths, experts warn. And this was a recent study conducted by DataCan, a research company in the UK, that found that routine screenings, urgent referrals, and treatments have been delayed or canceled, which could produce an additional 35,000 cancer deaths in the UK. And this is around the whole coronavirus shutdown. And I looked it up, Dr. Paul. The UK's total coronavirus deaths are only 44,000. So you're looking at almost as many deaths to deal with coronavirus than coronavirus itself.
They keep a lot of records. I'm referring more to our country. We have a lot of record on number of cases, and even early on number of deaths, and they continue to do it. The numbers aren't correct because they use false numbers, false figures, false definitions, and all these things. But they keep all these records, but I don't think they're keeping records of what the subject you're talking about there. How many people have been delayed their treatment? Matter of fact, even this article admitted it may be months and months before you know. If you missed getting your cancer treatment for 3-6 months, which is possible, it might have made a difference. But it's going to be hard to prove, but it's going to be statistically available. But they're not going to be able to do it because I don't think they want to measure these things. But there are doctors out there now that are starting to speak out. And I hope gets to more information, but it's really sad. And this whole thing in the British system, their cancer centers stayed open. Nobody came. The radiation units were available. The chemo units were available, but nobody got anything. And their decision was, well, it was much more dangerous catching the virus, which they didn't know anything about, than it would be to give them their cancer treatment where the diagnosis has been made, or making a diagnosis. So it's really bad when they make that judgment. That is why government bureaucrats shouldn't be practicing medicine and making these decisions, and individuals should be making these decisions. And quite frankly, in a perfectly free market economy, these decisions wouldn't be made by government. And people say, yeah, then everybody would be out in the streets and they couldn't get medical. Well, what's happening right now? They couldn't get it, and the taxes were still being taken. But the one thing is I had a couple years where the free market medicine was still existing. Matter of fact, there are places where they are practicing free market medicine, like up in Oklahoma City. There's some good operations there. So this idea that, if you have the market doing this, it'll be so terrible. Well, look at this. If they're correct, which I suspect they're going to be close, and we don't even keep the records, probably somebody's going to write it in history and say, why did they do it this way? Yeah. There's questions are starting to be asked, but we need to make sure they continue to ask these questions. Why do we put up with this when we know that government management of just about anything is not very good?
One thing we do know about cancer is the earliest detection is the best way to have a high survival rate. Well, from this BBC article, the rates of cancer referrals were 45% below pre-coronavirus levels. And that doesn't mean that people stopped getting cancer because corona came. They stopped going. And you point out the fact that the radiation and things were available. This is Professor Pat Price told the BBC about this particular study. She said that the hospitals, the radiation machines were lying idle. They could have saved lives. It's been safe to give radiotherapy during COVID-19. We know that now, she said. So too bad for the 35,000 that may lose their lives, and you can probably double that in the U.S. I would say, because we've had double as many coronavirus deaths. We've got much larger population, so you could be looking at related deaths just in cancer. Forget about heart attacks and strokes. Just in cancer, that it would be rivaling the death toll of the coronavirus itself.
They'll probably someday just say, "Oh, that was an unintended consequence."
We meant well.
but we do know that the consequence of government action is usually very negative. In economic policy, Mises was very firm on the idea that if you create a policy or a regulation, and I would say whether it's economic in general or whether it's medical care, you create two new problems. And what we're talking about, it looks like they've created 2 or 3 new problems by doing this regulation on terrorizing people and undermining people's liberties, spending more money, adding fuel to the fires of the recession that was already going on. So it's been there, and it's going to continue. And unfortunately, the correction is going to be tough. Like I said, that when they sent out the checks, the downturn, the economic downturn, didn't seem to be as serious as it could have been, because if nobody saved for this. So it was a terrible situation, and although it was predictable, they didn't save for it. So if they hadn't received the checks, the immediate reaction would have been worse. But the example that I use, it's just like getting a shot of morphine. They feel better again. So it's a terrible situation until people understand that you have to change the whole philosophy of what the government should be all about. And I think that's why the revolution was significant. They did. They institutionalized a system where government was supposed to be there in a minimal way to protect your liberty and let the people solve their problem. But we have lost that a long time ago. Medicine is a typical example of this. Matter of fact, in the last 100 years, there's been a deliberate attempt and a bias away from homeopathic medicine, natural causes. And I believe in allopathic medicine as well as homeopathic medicine and natural thing, but all I insist on is a balance. Don't say all one or the other. But we've mentioned this many times before. Guess who's in charge of the scenario, from our government, and that's pharma. The pharmaceutical companies. They're the ones who, right now in the midst of this coronavirus, somebody thinks that they're going to sell drugs and give vaccines and all of a sudden solve our problems. And bigger problems too. That's what's bad. Yes, they're dealing with coronavirus, but they already admit, well, maybe by spring or in a few more months, it'll be gone. But we have to be prepared, and that's an attitude which I think is very dangerous.
Not be prepared, be scared.
That's it.
Well, I'm going to close with a little story, Dr. Paul, because I think it's interesting. And the Texas spike is the biggest thing, and it's the biggest news, and it has political, it has all sorts of ramifications. And we have to understand what's happening. Why is there an explosion in so-called cases, which are really positive results of tests? And sometimes to understand big things, larger things, I think it makes sense to hone in on smaller things that really help explain what's happening. And put up the next slide. I'm going to go through 4 slides here, Dr. Paul. Project Unity, this is an interesting, it's a 501c3 nonprofit organization started back in, I think, 2016. It's a faith-driven organization that seems to have a really good goal. The goal is to bring people together of all colors and backgrounds and find a way to get along. And I think it's certainly, it was started by a minister. They have the best of intentions, it looks like. And let's go to the next one. They also have a lot of corporate sponsorship, AT&T, United Way, a lot of corporate money behind it. So looks like they're pretty solid ground. This is in Dallas again, where there's a big spike. Go to the next one. What are they up to? Well, they had a program, Together We Sing. It looked like a really neat thing. It brings together people, musicians and musical groups, to showcase diversity in the world of music. Looks like they're really following their mission of bringing people of different colors, different backgrounds together. But then look at the next one. This is a new project that they launched. Together We Test. And what they've done is they are focusing their efforts on massive, massive efforts of testing people in Dallas, getting those numbers up. And you really have to scratch your head. They're making it easy. It's free. Look at all these tons, dozens of locations. Go get your tests. Is it any wonder that cases or positive tests are increasing? And you could replicate this probably throughout the state with different organizations. And I'm not condemning this organization, but I'm trying to explain what might be happening.
Well, it's all about control, and that's what they're teaching, and people are conditioned for it, because if you don't do it, you're unpatriotic and you don't care about people's health, and so they make this excuse. But what they're talking about is more control, because once they talk about immunization, they're talking about a permanent passport put into your skin and be able to trace everything you do, and that is where the real problem is. It's the opposite of trying to solve a problem with free individuals making their own decisions, making some mistakes, but at least the mistakes are only for themselves. But more problems would be solved, and at least people would end up with a little bit of integrity instead of the dependency on the government and the capitulation and rolling over. If everything is dependent on the government, it may keep you going. They'll send you money and keep you going, but it never gives you quality of life, which means that you don't have quality of life unless you have a little bit of satisfaction with what you're doing. So that, not only has the government ruined our ability to take care of ourselves economically, because the economic mess is created by government, but also it's this sense of well-being. And we've heard so many stories now about how the kids are suffering, and when they're locked in their homes, this is house arrest. As soon as they talked about lockdown, I said, this is house arrest. And people have reacted to this in a serious manner and in a very negative manner. So we need to sort this out, but it is not that complicated about sorting out authoritarianism and individualism and freedom of choice. And if you say, no, it doesn't work here, and medicine is accepted, well, think about it, and think about how free people might solve some of these problems, how local government might solve these problems, and why we don't need WHO, and we don't need the CDC. We don't need all this stuff. We don't need the federal government writing these regulations, and we don't need the bureaucrats making all these decisions. So if there are places where you don't think it happened, study it and find out how free people can solve these problems, because right now the evidence is loud and clear. Our experiment is about over. Our experiment with individual liberty these last 100 years has been devastating, and it continues, and we're really at a crossroads right now, which way we go. And it's really pretty hard to say, we need to be self-sufficient and we need to take care of ourselves. And then they say, yeah, now what am I going to do without my check? Well, what are you going to do when the check is sent and it bounces? That is, it doesn't buy anything. And that's what's coming at the rate we're printing money. So I think the whole issue depends on personal liberty versus authoritarianism. And now we have an epidemic, severe epidemic of the spreading of authoritarianism, which has been alive and well for centuries. But right now, we in the United States is suffering from a severe case of authoritarianism that's controlling everything in our lives today. It's time for a change. We ought to accept the fact that liberty can solve our problems. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.